of things that's on my mind, and I would like to let them out. Look, I see reality breaking down all my fantasies. It would be nice if I at least had one fantasy. That neutrality about to take a terabyte from the American apple pie, better get a slice. It's kinda scary the way that this life is moving on. Marvin's doing backflips inside his grave, what's going on? We have head-on collisions, not seeing another's vision. Maybe that's the reason why some colors fit the description. A lot of relationships need life rafts, sinking ships. I guess you just can't have only one like potato chips. I would love for you to listen with an open heart, but would you really even hear me if it's torn apart? I don't do the things that I used to. I'll be fine even if I lose you, okay? Okay.
Peace and blessings, family. My name is asarimhotep, and I am with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology, as well as the popular YouTube channel Mbongi. I am an Africologist and computer scientist out of Houston, Texas, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I have spent the last 20 years researching the connections between ancient Kemet, that is modern Egypt, and modern Bantu-speaking cultures of Central and Southern Africa. Throughout this 20-year journey, I've examined all the relevant literature in numerous languages, collected paleontological as well as archaeological data from across millennia. I have presented hypotheses and abandoned hypotheses, come to conclusions and abandoned conclusions, reviewed arguments for and against known hypotheses, and analyzed frameworks that sought to define and characterize the vast array of African experiences. After over 20 years of asking critical questions of history, of philosophy, religion, and culture, I have finally gotten to the point where I have complete and total faith in the results of our research. I say our research because I am one of among a number of scholars who have either laid the foundations in classical Africology or are continuing to expand and develop more robust research on this connection between ancient Egyptian and Bantu civilizations. After spending so much time behind the computer and in the libraries and in the museums for over 20 years, I believe it is time to go out and to touch the living artifacts and engage with the people involved in the research whose stories we have been telling all this time, which brings us to why we are here today.
You see, I have a lot of things that's on my mind, and I would like to let them out.
Peace and blessings, fam. I don't know what happened to the commercial there, but today is January the 19th, 2022, and we are going to have a powerful discussion today, simply titled, this is part one of a two-part series titled Towards a Meaning of Yahweh, or Yahweh, or however you want to pronounce the theonym. Theonym meaning a deity, divine name. And so many of you may be familiar with this name. This is one of the many names allegedly of the biblical God, also known as El and Elohim and El Shaddai and a whole bunch of other titles. And so this is going to be a linguistic analysis. And what you see on the left-hand side is one of the earliest depictions of Yahweh on a vase. And, you know, this is, of course, a drawing, a reduplication of it. But this is going to be the focus of today. So without further ado, I want to welcome each and every one of you to the show. And as I mentioned, this is Brother Asar with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology, as well as the Maduendela Press Publishing. And want to give a shout out real quick to all of the people who have made themselves known in the chat. MITS or MIT-S. He's still concerned with me talking about Yahweh. I don't know where he thinks that I believe that Yahweh is a moon god, but he keeps commenting on my posts that Yahweh is not a moon god, but he's never heard me even make that argument. But welcome to the program. Glad to have you here. Peace and blessings to Stephen Mackey. Hotep to you and the family as well. Imhotep Ross is in the building. Welcome, welcome. Peace and blessings to Darnisha. C. Pickett is in the building. Harold Richardson has made it, and thank you for coming along. Infinite Minds has made himself known, and peace and blessings to you. Peace and blessings to Octo Thorpe is in the building, and love always to Sister Tamika for coming in and joining the conversation. Peace and blessings to Sunjiata, Ata Kakra, and Zombie in the place. Teti Ursama Rasa Neferu is in the place of peace and Black African power. Peace and blessings, Brother Jaded M. Ankh Hekara is in the building, all the way from the East Coast. Richard Sheffield is in the building and says can't stay, but we'll be back when I can. I understand this is work hours. I got to go to work after this, so I hope not to be long. And peace and blessings to Courtney Thompson and Andre Underwood, as well as Bantu History, as well as Ty Lackey, and anyone who I've missed. And peace and blessings to all of you who are listening live, both on the Harold Johnson Facebook page, as well as the asarimhotep Facebook page. So, again, the conversation is centered around Yahweh. And let me see. Courtney Thompson asks, want to know if you're going to make connections with the heavenly cow, the heavenly book of the cow, as it relates to this issue. Not today. So I'm trying to keep it linguistic and conceptual. And so there may be some connections, and one I haven't explored that, but thanks for the source. There may be something that I can add reviewing that. So peace and blessings to you. And again, we're dealing with Yahweh, and just to let y'all know that this is part 1 of part 2. So I'm either going to do part 2 on tomorrow, or I'm going to do part 2 on Friday. So check for it Thursday the 20th or Friday the 21st. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to get started. And so let me share my screen. Y'all know how we do. And I see they got a new feature. I'm going to have to test that out when I can. And so let's do that. Let me remove this. And I won't do a full screen just yet. Let me make sure on the other computer that y'all can see everything. So we're going to start off. Let me do the slideshow like that. So boom. Peace and blessings, Africa Plug. Thank you for joining. Got the big jug of water today. So you notice that on the title here, towards and it's supposed to be towards an etymology of Yahweh. I can actually correct that right now. Let's get this right. Just be typing stuff. So let's go back from the beginning. Okay, towards an etymology of Yahweh, Yahweh, however you want to say it. The date here says July the 18th, 2021, because that's when I was originally supposed to do this. This was based on, two things. First was a recent interview I had done, which I've now premiered on just the main program, which is an interview of Modupe Oduyoye, Dr. Modupe Oduyoye, who is a linguist and a theologian. And we brought up the etymology of Yahweh in our conversation. And then I think after that, I interviewed Brother Garfield Reed of the Dagger Squad on the program and release of his recent book, which I got over here, which is The Misconceptions and Misinformation by the Black Hebrew Israelites. And, for those of you who may not know, I used to be a Hebrew Israelite over 20 years ago of the ICUPK, now the ISUPK out of New York City. And, so I'm very familiar with the Black Hebrew Israelite doctrine. And so I've always had an interest in figuring out what is the origins of Yahweh, right? And so I had this, y'all know I've written a book, Alluja, Volume 2, as well as Towards a Comparative Dictionary. So y'all can go to asarimhotep or maduandelapress.com and, get your copies. And so, but however, the origin of my study goes back a lot further. So it's probably like 13 years now. So about 13 or 14 years ago, I started on writing a book, which was then titled Ogun and the Meaning of Kemet. So this was the book cover. I designed the book cover and everything. But the more and more research that I did, my initial assumptions in the direction I was going, I could no longer support in light of the evidence. So I scrapped the book. However, in researching for the meaning of Kemet, and actually, some 13 years later or so, I'm actually going to be releasing my book on Kemet, on the meaning of the word Kemet, which would be at the end of March. So y'all be on the lookout for that. But this was the original text, and some of this information became parts of my book, and that came out in 2016. That's Ubiti. Some parts became parts of the Alluja Volume 2 that you saw previously. And so, but part of my research that you'll see today extends, that far back in terms of the research question itself and trying to solve this particular problem. And so, of course, for those of you who do not know, the word Yahweh is, one of the names allegedly of the divine in the biblical tradition. And some people, this is how you write the name. However, if you stack it like this, some people will say that this represents man and Yahweh is a man, etc., etc. I'm not finna make that argument today, but it's just funny to see this argument. And as I mentioned before, the catalyst for the recent conversation came from Dr. Modupe Oduyoye and our interview, uh, which happened earlier this summer, way back in July of, or I should say the past summer of July 2021. And so this is Dr. Modupe Oduyoye on the left-hand side, and this is one of his texts, The Sons of the Gods and the Daughters of Men, an Afro-Asiatic interpretation of Genesis 1 through 11. So a native Yoruba speaker, linguist, and theologian, studied at Yale University, and has an array of very profound works if you can find them now. And so go check. I think I have, if not the only interview of Dr. Modupe Oduyoye on the net, in terms of a video interview. I'm not going to say it's the only, but I think I have the only. So let's go. And so again, it was on Patreon. So I was going to tell y'all to go to Patreon. I'm going to tell y'all to go to Patreon anyway. So, as mentioned at the beginning of the program, I am shooting I'm in phase 1 of shooting a documentary film called Chiena Into, and you can support that film project by becoming a Patreon member at patreon.com/asarimhotep, or you can go to chienaintofilm.com, in which we'll say more about that a little later. And so in that conversation, he talks about how when he was first starting to make connections between his native language of Yoruba and the Semitic languages. Um, and keep in mind that Dr. Modupe Oduyoye is one of the linguists on the project to translate the Bible into the Yoruba language. So this concern with proper translation was very major for Dr. Oduyoye. And so I think since then others have made this connection, but when he was still a student, he told us that he made the connection between the god Jupiter and Yahweh, and argued that Yahweh was a dialectical variation of what became an Indo-European Jupiter. So, let me see something here. And so I have highlighted here in the red the um, main consonants of Jupiter. And so as we see here, Jupiter, of course, is the god of the sky in Roman mythology. And from Middle English, we have Joves, from Latin, Lupitor, Lovis, from Proto-Italic, Joe, ablative case of Dios, from Proto-Indo-European Dios, doublet of Dios and Zeus. So when you say Jupiter, or you say Zeus, they are linguistically at least one and the same, right? And so when we go to the online etymological dictionary, it tells us that Jove, or Jo, is a Roman god of the bright sky, as a poetical name of the planet Jupiter, late 14th century, from Latin Aeolus, from Proto-Indo-European Ju, meaning to shine, in derivatives, sky, heaven, god, etc. Compare Zeus, and of course, see Jupiter. And so there have been other scholars who have attempted to make that connection, and I believe that there is merit for this connection, not necessarily a borrowing from biblical times, but that through a series of processes, which we'll talk about a little later, this word entered into the root of the word that became Yahweh, also entered into Proto-Indo-European. And so, one of the texts I reference all the time is the Oxford Introduction to the Proto-Indo-European and the Proto-Indo-European World. They give a breakdown of this word that you see here. So even when you say the word day, the word day means, to shine, and comes from this same root. And so you see these different variations, meaning sky, heaven, God, but ultimately it means to shine. And so this is going to be very important as we move forward. And so Modupe Oduyoye argues that you can find cognates of the word Yahweh in West Africa in the forms of Yeve, Yewe, Yehwe, Yihwe, Yehwe, in the Ewe, Fon, and Goon languages, respectively. And if you know anything about these spirits or deities, they represent the power of thunder and lightning, And so keep in mind, when we're dealing with Jupiter and we're dealing with Zeus, we're dealing with thunder and lightning and shining. There's this element of shining to it. And then when you deal with this, it is thunder and lightning, and this is going to be repeated and very important to the conversation. And so when we come across works, for example, of Jean-Claude Mboli on the origin of African languages, he puts together the theory that there has been a series of migrations out of Africa by a number of what he calls Negro Egyptian speakers. And Negro Egyptian is a language family that originates with with Dr. Theophilo Benga in his 1993 work on African languages. And so he, gets rid of the Afro-Asiatic and combines those with Niger Congo languages and Nilo-Saharan languages, and that becomes, Theophilo Benga's Negro Egyptian. But then there's also Khoisan languages, and then the Berber languages. So he considers all of those African languages, but he separates the Semitic. And I'm talking about Dr. Theophilo Benga. But Jean-Claude Mboli starts anew, and he validates the Negro Egyptian hypothesis, but he does not adhere to Niger Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, or Khoisan. So, but anyway, when we examine this text, he also does a preliminary examination of a number of items in Indo-European languages as well as Semitic languages. And so what he argues here is this word Dio, or Jew, meaning God, which we saw earlier, which derives from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning to shine, that this in fact is a Negro Egyptian word, meaning star, and it is related to Jehuti and Zande language, Diwi meaning moon, and so it when you talk about the word diva, it is the word that's just a different variation of the same root, meaning God in day, in daytime, etc., etc. And so this is my translation of the page, and I forgot to put the page number there. I need to go back and do that. You can see his connections. And so while we'll see later on, I believe that there I don't agree with his argument here in terms of the connection with Jehuti, but I do at the same time. And I know it sounds contradictory, but it's just a way. It's a little technicality, which I will get into a little later. So understand that. So now we're going to get into some of the interpretations of Yahweh. So here's one text that might interest you, and it's the origin and interpretation of the Tetragrammaton. And so the Tetragrammaton is that YHWH, and a lot of scholars believe that you could not pronounce God's name, that they purposely left out the vowels so that you couldn't pronounce God's name, because of course in ancient times, if you know the name of a thing, then you can control it. And so it has been known since then as the Tetragrammaton. And so in this text on pages 7 and 8, the author, Dr. Spohr, says the name Yahweh is explained by some as being connected etymologically with the Indo-Aryan Jovis, and that Jovis is a variation of Jupiter that we saw earlier, Jove. It is then derived from delta iota upsilon, of course, Greek letters there, to shine. Hence, Yahweh could signify the bright ether. This name is also declared to be ideally, though not etymologically, related to Deva, Zeus. Thus, the name would signify the high one, the heavenly, but there is so little common to both languages of which we can speak with any degree of certainty that we cannot think of deriving Yahweh from the Indo-Aryan stem delta iota upsilon. The untenableness of this derivation was already recognized by F. Tuch, if I'm saying that correctly, who says the similarity of Yahweh with Java's Jupiter, which is insufficient enough in itself, disappears entirely when the name is pronounced rightly, Yahweh, and it's Yahweh. And so, as I stated, when Oduyoye made his assumption, he he was just in school. But there's others who have made these connections independent of Dr. Modupe Oduyoye, and there's already those who have rejected that correspondence. And I'm going to show how that there is a model which makes this tenable. And so, again, so now there is a text called Yahweh Before Israel, Glimpses of History in a Divine Name by Daniel E. Fleming. And, in this text, I believe that, he kind of starts off with the connection of Yahweh with a group of people, arguing that the word Yahweh was first connected with a group of people that had this name before it was used as a divine theonym. And ultimately, I disagree with him for reasons which we will see, but he says some very important things that I want to highlight in these next two slides. And so he states here on page 166 on footnote 6 that Lewis 2020b chapter 6 reviews the question in some detail, concluding that the consensus of scholarship is certainly correct that Yahweh represents a verbal form with the Y representing the third masculine single verbal prefix of the verb hya, meaning to be. The first point of evidence for Lewis is Exodus 3 and 14. Note the recent proposal by Drewel to seek a different verb, hue or hawa, as to destroy. And I'm going to show that the latter, that one that I have highlighted in red, is closer to the truth than what is found in Exodus 3 and 14. And so from consensus, at least from I know, most scholars dismiss the Jews who tried to interpret the word Yahweh, because Yahweh is not an Israelite, it's not a Hebrew word. So you're not going to find the etymology in Hebrew. And so the Hebrews have this bad habit of trying to interpret words that don't belong to their language using words from their language. So you have all kinds of folk etymology in the Bible. For example, the word, Babylon. The word Babylon comes from a series of words, Ba'ab Ilu, meaning gates of God, in the quote unquote Babylonian language. But because these were not Hebrew words, the Hebrews interpreted as to babble and to be confused of tongue. And it is because of their misunderstanding of Ba'ab Ilu, the Babylonian word, that they created a whole mythology on the Tower of Babel and tried to explain the diversity in languages on earth through their misunderstanding of this phrase, the gates of God, which refers to the entrance of a city. So in that same fashion, when you read in Exodus 3 and 14, that it has to deal with, and so this is where when Moses is meeting God on the mountain after they have left Egypt, allegedly from being in slavery for over 400 years. And, you know, the Israelites are down at the bottom of the mountain, ultimately celebrating and having the golden calf and all that other kind of stuff. And he's sitting up there talking to God, getting the commandments. And he asks him, who sent me? And then he says, I am that I am, or I'm coming, or I become who I become. There's many different interpretations of the phrase that ultimately translate into English as, you know, I am that I am. But most people, you know, remember it as I am that I am. But so it is in that context that, you know, the Hebrews tried to interpret the word Yahweh as meaning from a root meaning to be. And so that's what this author is talking about here, talking about it derives from a verb, haya, meaning to be. But this is far from the case. Again, it's not a Hebrew word, so it's folk etymology to interpret it from this root meaning to be. And so, but on another page, page 179, the author states, nevertheless, patterns that align attested spellings and particular names suggest the possibility that two verbal roots may be in play. Yahweh Il is almost universally written with Yahweh, and then Yahweh Dagan, Yahweh Arak occur only with Ach, while Yahweh Ashar, Yahweh, Nasi are written with both. And he's trying to articulate why that Ach is written in this form, like in Yahweh, Ashar, but not in the other variations of these theonyms, Yahweh, Yahweh Dagan, Yahweh Il, etc., etc. So both verbal elements taken separately may be associated with the storm god Adu, and the Yahweh form occurs with two more major deities in Dagan and the moon god Iraq. Neither form, especially the common Yahweh name, can be limited to the use with the god and dinger, because it was written in cuneiform. So that's what that dinger, is here, or Elah. Whatever the name represents, it does not seem in any case that the element applies only to Elu or El as the god known from later Ugarit. The element never indicates a god, and it cannot be invoked as direct evidence for what became what would become the God of Israel. And so, but he's making connections here that there is a connection with Adu, also known as Hadu, which is associated with a Canaanite deity, which we all know as Baal. And so keep in mind, we already have argued for a possible connection to an Indo-European root meaning to shine, which then has derived meanings of a god or heavens, or like, the brightness of the sky. Then you have this other connection meaning to destroy, which we saw in the previous slide. And in this one, in terms of, in two connections, one dealing with the moon and the one dealing with the storm god Adu. And so all of this is going to come together, because we're going to show that there was a synthesis of correlations based on paronymy. And for those of you who are familiar or not familiar with at least my scholarship in this channel, you know that we come to discover that paronymy is very essential to understand in terms of the development of culture and the development of the personifications and anthropomorphizations of, uh, divine concepts. And so paronymy is a linguistic concept in which a population believes that there is a necessary connection between two or more words that sound alike. And so linguistically, there may be a situation where these two or more words in a language do derive from a common root, and thus the similarity in form and meaning. And then there's a case where it's just pure coincidence that two or more words sound alike in the language. But for the ancient mind, the mere similarity of the pronunciation or the sameness of the pronunciation again necessitates in the mind that there is a connection. So what the ancients would do was synthesize these two paronymic concepts, even if they have different meanings, and then personify that or add that as elements to deities and or whatever particular concept arises from the synthesis of that those two connections. And so that's going to become very, very important in our discussion. And so let me continue on here. So as I mentioned earlier, for the scholar that rejected the connection between Yahweh and Jove and Jupiter, et cetera, they do this because there is no clear connections between Semitic and Proto-Indo-European, at least in their at least with their scholarship. But there have been a number of scholars, linguists, who have made the connections. K. Campbell Dunn is one who argues that ultimately Indo-European derives from a branch of Niger-Congo speakers who migrated out of Africa into the Levant and through to Mesopotamia and the Caucasus regions. A similar argument, and this is all based on linguistics, comes from Dr. Modupe, Jean-Claude Mboling. And so in his work that we mentioned earlier, The Origin of African Languages, based on his linguistic analysis, with him, reconstructed Negro Egyptian, which I call Chiena Intu, he argues that ultimately Negro Egyptian speakers left Africa and, within the last, uh, 10 to 20,000 years, somewhere around that, anywhere between like 8 and 20,000 years, into what was known as the Levant and Mesopotamia, and then ultimately in where the origins of Indo-European, which is kind of hotly debated whether it's in the Black Sea, Caucasus area, or in the slower part of Mesopotamia. So I think Jean-Claude Mboli argues for a Mesopotamian origin of Indo-European, which would help, of course, in these connections between Indo-European and Semitic. But it is this model here that and I won't go into the details of Negro Egyptian or Chiena Intu. I've renamed Negro Egyptians for conceptual reasons. The greater African language family I call Chiankanda, and Chiankanda, Chikulu is the oldest branch, and then there's classic Chiankanda, and then Chiankanda breaks up into two main branches, which we call Chiena Intu and Kabed, and then the Chiena Intu languages interact with the Kabed languages in the Levant and then give birth to Proto-Semitic. And so, we see this model over here on the left-hand side, with Proto-Bantu speakers and other, in terms of the Behir branch of Chiena Intu, which creates pre-Proto-Semitic from the Kabed branch, and then their interactions creates Proto-Semitic. So we argue that Proto-Semitic is ultimately the result of a polygenesis, a convergence process of the interactions of several different language groups. And so that is beyond the scope of this conversation. So, we can have that and defend that at another time. But just giving you the framework, a recent framework that allows for us to make these types of connections, because this same migrants who came out of Africa and intermingled and created Proto-Semitic also created Indo-European with folks that were there. And so this is why you see a lot of Proto-Indo-European words that are native to Africa, because we brought that when we migrated out of Africa. And so there, as always, there have been a number of proposals for the origin of Yahweh, and the late ancestor Makheru, Dr. Yosef ben Yochanan, has put his hat in the race and argues that it is ultimately out of Egypt. And he makes this, it's a brief discussion. It's not a thorough analysis, but in The Black Man of the Nile and His Family, you can see this. So he states in the text on page 344 that Yahweh was a minor ancient Egyptian divinity, which he traces it to the 26th dynasty, 663, between 663 and 527 BCE. However, he does not provide a source for his set of glyphs. And so you can see the glyphs here that he provides, and it is Ihu, which would, be Yahweh, and it has a foreign determinative or classifier, the mountains here, and of course you can see the divine nature symbol, at the end. And so, however, there are variations of forms that we're able to find in other dictionaries, and so we come to find that Ihu is actually a form of Tho, and which is another variation of the word Jehuti, but that Ihu is also a variation of Ehim, and we'll get into why this is going to be very important to our conversation. And so this is from, remember the book that I talked about earlier that I had started, but I decided to abandon that project because of the different direction that the scholarship was taking me in terms of Ogun and the meaning of the word Kemet. And so what I state here is the Egyptian variant Hem sounds close to the Hebrew name Jahim, that is alleged to mean raised up. One source argues that it is Arabic and means to light and stir up a fire, to stare with sharp eyes, a pit with blazing fire. The word Ajham is to mean someone with red eyes. This is going to be important. Keep in mind, I want y'all to write these. When I say write down these words, I want y'all to write these words down. So write down the meaning shine, write down the meaning storm and storm God. We've already been introduced to this. Write down the word to destroy. And so now we're going to add to that light, to light and stir up a fire, and to stare with sharp eyes, a pit with blazing fire. So fire, sharp eyes, and to light a fire, to stir up. All of this is going to come together in a very meaningful way. And so I say more investigation is needed here. These meanings would fit in nicely with a deity associated with a volcano or storms. See next footnote and compare to Egyptian Hem, Hem, be burning, be hot, to burn, without the J prefix. So, and so there was in Alluja Volume 1, I've already, made an argument for Yahweh possibly being cognate with the word Nyame of West Africa and Amen of ancient Egypt. And so, but there's this text, Hebrewisms of West Africa by Joseph J. Williams, which was first published in 1931. Now, keep in mind, this notion here, Hebrewisms of West Africa, is really a misnomer. It's really Africanisms in Hebrewisms. which should really be the argument, because we can explain everything in Africa. We can explain everything amongst the Hebrews with African languages and cultures, but we cannot explain African languages and cultures via Hebrew or the Semitic languages. And this will become apparent even in our conversation. So in the text, we talk about the Ashante and Yahweh is but another form of the Hebrew Yahweh. Professor Clay, who assures us that in the Marushu archives found at Nippur, belonging to the reigns of Artaxerxes and Darius, the divine element in Hebrew names is written as Jama for Yahweh. So when you see that Wa, like in modern Hebrew, this W turns into V. So, they say Yahweh in that Yiddish Hebrew. But in the text, you'll see it as Yahweh. But that wah in some dialects of Hebrew and some dialects of just Semitic in general, that wah becomes ma as in Mary. And so what he's saying here is that the divine element in Hebrew names is written Yama, a Yama for Yahweh. Remember that Yahweh, and Yahweh that we saw earlier in this text here. So when we say Yahweh and Yahweh Dagon, Yahweh El, Yahweh Arach, Yahweh, etc., etc. This Yahweh is just a reduced form of Yahweh or Yahweh, however you want to pronounce it. And so that's what he's saying here. But and so he says, Clay also mentions a tablet found at Tanakh, which contains the divine name of Israel's God written as Jami. So this is going to be important. So when I say that, it is you see the same interchange here between Ihu and Ihim, because the M and W in Egyptian interchanges. And so this is going to become important, especially to this word Ashham, which means someone with red eyes, or Jachim. These are Egyptian names, for the record, not Hebrew. And so, we know Jahim, put that woman first, for y'all old enough to know that song. And so this is going to become very important. So in the Mr. Clay or Dr. Clay is none other than Albert Clay, who is a specialist in Semitic languages and cultures at Yale University. He is citing the previous author was citing Clay's book, The Empire of the Amorites, which was published in 1919, page 54. He is important because he notes a particular sound correspondence in Semitic that is instructive for us here, which I mentioned earlier. In his text, he notes that some Semites use M and others use W to represent the same sound. So in linguistics, we call this an allophone. So these are allophonic. That means we can substitute these sounds for each other, and there will be no change in the meaning of the word in whatever this interchange is. So it's just page 72 of The Empire of the Amorites. And so this same dialectical interchange or allophonic interchange also exists in the ancient Egyptian language, which is going to be very important for us here. And so I proved that to you now, so you can see the sound correspondences M equals W in allophonic form. And so you see this here in this word zamer or khamir, meaning to turn sour, to spoil, to go bad. And the variant of that is zerer or zecher or chewer, to rot, to spoil. And you can see, the same, three consonants, meaning beer jug. In a variant of that same word, it means pot, jar, cooking pot, etc., etc. And so we can see that there's an interchange in Egyptian between M as in Mary and W as in what you doing? I don't know, or water, I should say. That's a better correspondence or reference, I should say. And so, but uh, what's also going to be important is that the interchange of the W sound with the y I sound, which we write with English J. So this isn't an English J, like if we was to say Jesus or Jack or Juicy. So no, this is either an I or like a Y sound in the Egyptian language. It's a semi-vowel. And so these semi-vowels interchange and they let us know something. So this, if you see a variant of the word with the I or Y here, that means the following vowel is more than likely an E or an I. But if you find the variant with a W, as we see here at the top, that means it's usually followed with a U. The vowel that follows is a U or an O sound. So here's just some examples of this interchange also in the Egyptian language. So this, it may not be important to you right now, but when you review this video, it becomes very important. And so this becomes important when you're looking at these different variations, because that name Ihu, that Ihu or Ihim that we met earlier is also has a very Ihi, meaning God, also to darken the sky of stars. This is an epithet, a name of the god Set in ancient Egypt, and also Apophis, or Apep, the violent and chaotic snake of ancient Egypt. And what's going to be very important to this discourse is that Seth is also associated with violent storms. And so remember those key words that I told you to jot down, to keep in your mind as you're listening to this program. Violent storms, fire, light, to burn, fiery or red eyes, which is also going to be important. And so you can see this variation of the word here in its name, of Seth, of Apophis, and also in association with deacon stars, but again, to darken of the sky. And it's more so the darken of the sky because of dark rain clouds. It didn't rain much in Egypt, but there are times where, like when I was in Egypt in 2015, like I even have it on videotape that we thought it was about to rain, but it wasn't. But you seen the dark clouds in the sky and lightning um, coming from the clouds. And so the following, what I'm about to cite, comes from this journal article, from this particular journal here. It's Egypt and the Levant, the International Journal for Egyptian Archaeology and Related Disciplines, right? And so the title of the article is Seth is Baal, Evidence from the Egyptian Script. So remember that the connection between Yahweh and Adu, or Hadu, which was mentioned earlier, as a storm god, a storm deity. And the connections between them is going to be shown as Baal. So you're going to see that Seth, Baal, and Hadu, Adu, they're all related to each other in this Near Eastern area, especially of Canaan. And what's also important, you got to remember that from pre-dynastic times, Egypt had colonies in the Levant. And then in later times, after Amenhotep, or Amenhotep III, when they started doing the Middle Eastern campaigns, Canaan was under rule of Egypt, which makes the whole Exodus story a bunch of BS, because because at the time that the Exodus was supposed to have happened, Canaan, which they ran into, which they escaped to, quote unquote, was an ancient Egyptian colony. And so this is going to be very, very important. And so the author of this text is Niv Alan, and who is an associate curator in the Department of Egyptian Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where he focuses on the display and interpretation of the Ramesside art and of textual objects throughout Egyptian history. He earned his MA from the Hebrew University, Jerusalem in Biblical Studies, and his PhD in Egyptology from Yale, another Yale graduate, along with Dr. Modupe Oduyoye. So, hold on one sec. And excuse me. And so he states, on page 19, this was published in 2007, that Baal, who is well known by the name Baal Hadu, remember that Hadu or Adu, so it's a combined name, Baal Hadu, from the text found in Ugarit, Ras Shamra, appears originally as an epithet of the god Hadad, or Hadu, Adu, etc., whose cult had begun to spread in the ancient Near East as early as the 3rd millennium BCE. Baal has characteristics of the god Hadad, who was known throughout the region for his violent and fierce attributes, but the former also has local attributes associating him strongly with fertility, and as such comprises both revival and growth on the one hand and withering and decay on the other, right? And so again, Baal Hadu, or Baal, is associated with violent storms and a violent nature. And so when we look at all of the characteristics of Yahweh, and why he brought a storm on everybody but saved Noah and his family, right? He brought a flood, and the Old Testament is very violent because Yahweh is violent. And so, death is his solution to all problems in the Old Testament. And we've had this discussion before, but that's because of these characteristics, because he's ultimately, at least in part, a violent storm deity. So he takes those characteristics, and you see it applied throughout the biblical text. And so we continue. Evidently, Baal was known in Egypt as early as the 13th dynasty, although possibly by his former name as Hadad. Moreover, the Seth Baal cult in Avaris continued to exist throughout the Hyksos period into the New Kingdom, as the temple of Seth of Avaris was functioning continuously into the Ramesside period. According to the 400-year stela, it began to function already some 70 years before the Hyksos period. So, you got to understand, Avaris is located in the Delta, and when the so-called Hyksos invasion, happened, and the Hyksos was ruling, they were ruling, what the Egyptians considered Lower Egypt, but by our, compass is the upper, part, the northern part of modern Egypt. Avaris was the home of these Semites, who were ruling Egypt at the time. And so their god was Baal, which was connected with Seth. So you can see why in later periods why Seth was looked at as an evil deity, because he was connected to these Semites who brought in this instability, the second intermediate period, this period of instability into ancient Egypt. But the reason why these connected, because both Seth and Baal, Hadu, etc., were both violent storm deities, and also was the representative or the patron deity of the nomadic pastoralist herders. And that connection with Seth will have to be addressed at a different time, but it's important to note this in regards to this conversation, right? So that word Baal is native to Africa. And of course, when these Negro Egyptian speakers migrated and integrated into the Levant, or the so-called Middle East, they brought this term with them. But the word Baal is simply a word meaning Lord or husband or owner. And you can find it in the Hebrew language, Baal, in the phrase Baal Habayit, or like a landlord. In the Ge'ez Ethiopian language, Baal or Baal, owner, head of family, husband, festival, feast. In the Akkadian, Belu, because the laryngeal sounds have been dropped. Master, ruler, owner. In Ugarit, Baal, Lord, owner. So when you say Baal, it's just a literal word for a husband, a lord, an owner, a master, right? It's just a common everyday word that they use as a title to represent the divine in Semitic languages. But in Africa, the word is used either as simply a word for divinities, like in the case of in Luganda. So they say Lubale or Balu Bale, right? Divinities, or like in the Yoruba language, Bale or Bale, father, husband, leader, householder, master of the house, governor, president, chief of a town or village. It is part of a phrase, Bale Ile, landlord. And so in the Chadic languages, Bela, Gofi, Belewe, man, Saho, Bala. And matter of fact, a dialectical variant of this word in Egyptian and in Chiluba is a word for phallus or for penis. So it derives first and foremost as a word for a man, a literal man. But then, because the man is the head of the household, it takes on these derivative meanings. Thus, husband, father, governor, president, chief, owner, head of household. That's all Baal means. And so it comes from that word. So all words for deities come from everyday common words in a language, which is how we know that Yahweh is not a Hebrew word. And so that same article continues and states the following. The identification between Baal and Seth was so successful not only because of the latter's role as the god of the foreign lands, but also through his storm god characteristics, which are common to both gods. The depth of this syncretism is indicated by the fact that most of the attestations of the name Baal in Egyptian texts are classified with the Seth sign. So Seth has his own hieroglyph, and when you write the word Baal in Egyptian, you use the Seth determinative. So they're making that connection here. But it wasn't just Baal who was identified with Seth, but also Seth was identified with Baal in a clear case of cultural appropriation or an enrichment of the Seth concept, as Tevelde describes it. It would seem, he's quoting Tevelde right now. So he says, it would seem that the foreign god Baal, who is regarded as manifestation of Seth, because the latter is the lord of the foreign countries, is now enriching the Egyptian concept of Seth with a new function, right? So there's another text, Yahweh and the Sun, Biblical and Archaeological Evidence for Sun Worship in Ancient Israel, by J. Glenn Taylor. And he says something that's very profound here. He says, secondly, should Yahweh be viewed, and this is from the conclusion. So this is at the end of the book. And so what this text is essentially arguing. So this Dr. Taylor, he wrote his PhD dissertation on this topic, and this book is just, an updated, at least for the time, 1993. But I think his PhD dissertation was from 89. So in 1989 was the PhD dissertation. 1993 was the publishing of this text. So this text here is showing that the word and the god Yahweh was part of a sun cult. But and so at the and then he provides evidence all throughout the text showing that, and I think he's also from Yale, so Yale is doing it. But so he says or it's his Stanford. He's either from Yale or Stanford. I forgot which one. And so he states in the text. So get the text and read it. So secondly, should Yahweh be viewed as a sun god? Certainly not, at least not any more than Yahweh should be considered, say, a storm god, on the basis that the Old Testament borrows imagery of Baal and applies it to Yahweh. So y'all seeing the connections here? Yahweh is given the attributes of Baal, which was the Canaanite god. But what I argue is that he already really had these attributes, which is why they synchronize the two. So Yahweh takes on the characteristics of Baal, which is a violent storm god, and then they sync them up. And then when they connect with the ancient Egyptians, now Yahweh is, Baal is associated with Seth. And so you see this triad here of Baal, Yahweh, and Seth of ancient Egypt. And they're all associated with this violence, these kind of mean characteristics, as is expressive of a storm god. And so, but all of this is going to come together. Remember the words I told you to write down: sun, light, fire, to light a fire, red eyes, storm, violent storms. So write all of that down and keep all of that in mind as we're going through this conversation here. And so it's important to know these sound correspondences that I'm saying here. And I think I'm going to just increase the size because I want y'all to be able to see some of this stuff. So I'm gonna make that full screen. And let me move that out of the way. And, consider donating. We're still donating. We're still fundraising for the upcoming Egypt trip for the documentary. So if you have some extra change, please consider donating to the project, either through the through CashApp, or go to chianaintufilm.com, or donating through the live super chat. And of course, you will be acknowledged in the film as well as on the website. So but this, what I have here, is just part of a table from the text from Dr. Yoshiyuki Muchiki, if I'm saying that correctly. He's Japanese, and he wrote a text called Egyptian Proper Names and Loanwords in Northwest Semitic. And so this is this is very important. A lot of names y'all thinking are Hebrew are not Hebrew names; they're Egyptian names, and it shows you the influence of ancient Egypt on Israel and just Semitic speakers. Period. West Semitic speakers. So these are the kind of correspondences here. So what I want to show here is that when you see for example, in Egyptian, this what we transliterate as J or I, it corresponds in Semitic with either a glottal stop or the Y sound, like in Yahweh or Yahweh. So notice the correspondences here. The IE, which we find like in that, corresponds in Phoenician, in glottal stop Y, in Aramaic, glottal stop Y, in Hebrew, glottal stop Y, but in Ugaritic, A or E, or the I sound, but it's we pronounce it E when it's written here, right? So this is important to know. So we know what the sound correspondences are in regards to that. So, but what I also want to highlight here is this series. And so what I want to show you is how the evolution of terms exist. All right. So, again, this comes from, well, two books, the Aluja Volume 2 and Nesubiti King in Ancient Egyptian 2016. And so what I show here, in coming off of the Mboli model, Mboli argues, for this primal lexeme, which we have in a starry form, K, which is a sound of dry wood being cut, sound of crackling of a branch, which becomes Kehu, fire or sun in the Chiana Intu languages or Negro Egyptian. And we see a variant of this root, which is reduced to Chet, which means fire or burn on the body in ancient Egyptian. But then the T is substituted by M. So we have Chem, warm, dry, hot. And then Chem is suffixed here by this grapheme, which is represented by this arm glyph in the hieroglyphic language, in the hieroglyphic script. Now this word for fire, burn, warm, dry, hot, when suffixed again, becomes the word for demolish buildings, to dig up earth, harm someone, debar from, exclude, attack the enemy. With another suffix, when it's suffixed again with W, it means to demolish buildings. Another different one, and this is an agent suffix, the masculine agent suffix, it becomes a stone breaker, demolition worker. And so remember this root here, demolish buildings. And then when suffixed by T, it becomes the noun ruins, or an abandoned area, or a piece of land. And then Chemiyet, female evil entity, demoness, destroyer. So you can see the relationship between how the word for fire then comes to derive meanings of destroy, or to dig up, to exclude, to attack, to demolish, and then in noun form, ruins, abandoned, and then ultimately evil, the word for evil itself. And so this is a female evil entity because of the feminine T suffix, but ultimately becomes evil. So now you're understanding how that root that we mentioned earlier from that other citation, meaning to destroy, becomes very important to our discussion here. And so this is all going to become important. So that's why I'm saying when you're talking about light, when you're talking about fire, when you're talking about sun, when you're talking about violence in the form of storm, violent storms and things, all of these are derivatives from an ancient root meaning fire, right? And this exists also in Semitic. And so in her PhD dissertation titled The Biradical Origin of Semitic Roots, also published in 2007, we can see the same words here. So we have hem, hot, and this is in West Semitic here, with the following cognates in Hebrew: skam or skam, Arabic ham, Ugaric, skam, Akkadian, emu, because remember the laryngeals are missing in Akkadian, and Aramaic, skamam, denotes a voiceless velar fricative, all dealing with hot. These are words for hot. But notice that when you add the third radical to these words, Hamas, zeal, Hamam in Arabic, spa, hot bath, Hamasha, enrage, infuriate, Huma, fever, Humir, red, bloody, excited, Humam, lava, embers, Tahamus, fanaticism, Hamaza, burn to the tongue while tasting. So you see all these variations deriving from a root hot. And in Hebrew, chemed, desire, because you had that burning desire. You see a fine sister, you be like, ooh, she fills me with chemed. It's chemed. If we're speaking Hebrew, and I'm messing this pronunciation all up. Chemar, become inflamed, agitated. Skumas, be ruthless. Yachim, to be hot with anger or desire, conceive. Also, Hamas, do violence, injury. So when you hear about Hamas in the Middle East, it derives from a word meaning to do violence. It means hot. And so this same semantic projection or derivative process that you find in ancient Egyptian, you find with the same word in Semitic. So if what I'm arguing ultimately that is, if Yahweh was a native Semitic word, it would be pronounced more so like one of these words here. It would sound more so like in Hebrew, Yachim, be hot with anger or desire or conceive, etc. It would be closer to that if this was a native Hebrew word, but it's not a Hebrew word. And so, this is going to become very important, because the huiti means shimmering light, shining light. And when you add the j in front of it, you get Jehuti, the god Jehuti. So this is where a lot of the connections between the moon comes in, because Jehuti, one of his representations was the moon, also a baboon. But the words for moon in many languages derive simply from a word for light. And so we can see this connection here, the god Jehuti, god of light. And this becomes metaphoric, and that's why he's the god of intelligence, of mathematics, of education, because of his connection with light. So again, when we see this H.W here that I have highlighted in red, remember that the W and Y interchange. And so now that Ihi, the Ihu for deacon stars, for stars, still dealing with light and fire. But in this form here, Ihi, the or Yahi, the darkening of the sky, because this is Set here. So these aren't the same deities. This is Jehuti, and this is Setet or Set or whatnot. But notice that this word Hu or Huyit also means flood, Nile of the Nile, rain. Huyit, blow and impact, injury. So flooding, rain, deity, like all of these they're synthesizing these concepts here. And so this is how you get the association with a violent storm, because the root, the variant of the root, has to deal with violence. And of course, as a derivative, one derivative of the word for fire. And then when they apply that to describing a flood or rain, because remember, in Egypt, rain is destructive. It's not like if it was to rain in the Congo, because in the desert, because everything is made out of the sand, rain destroys the infrastructure. So it's considered violent. It's considered a bad thing, which is why they praise the flood. But the flood is also destructive. So we continue. So the main characteristics, as told to us in the article we just mentioned, is that Seth is associated with aggressive behavior, weather disturbances, and uproariousness. So this is why he has the bad character. This is why he is the conceptual opposite of both those Osiris and Horus in the ancient Egyptian text. And so this is the author, the picture of the author, Yahweh and the sun, biblical and archaeological evidence for sun worship in ancient Israel. And again, he provides all kinds of evidence. I'm just showing one here in terms of Yahweh, God of hosts, restore us, let your face shine that we may be delivered. You'll find all kinds of language in there where they're showing Yahweh in not only in terms of violent storms, but also in terms of in representation of the sun. And remember, like, Yahweh is the leader of the God. He's the God of hosts. The hosts are the stars of the sky, and so our sun is the leader of all the other stars that exist in the heavens. And so this is how it is panned out in the text. And so there are many of scholars who have made this connection before. And so, I'm just trying to show y'all, I'm trying to give y'all some source material that y'all can study on your own to get more familiar with the role of, geology and cosmology in terms of the association and inspiration for the anthropomorphic forms or deities. And so a good book to get, I have the physical book of this back in Philly. It is Natural Knowledge in Pre-Classical Antiquity. And so you can see on the cover this violent storm with lightning and things, which becomes very important in this particular text, right? And so they're showing how natural phenomena is the inspiration for a lot of deities and myths. And so when you're reading about these gods and goddesses, they're really representations of forces of nature, which we should know already. Another good book to get is Myth and Geology. It's an edited work. And I'm going to read the description here because it's going to be very important for us for a previous conversation that we were having here. And so Myth and Geology is the first peer-reviewed collection of papers focusing on the potential of myth storylines to yield data and lessons that are of value to the geological sciences. Building on the nascent discipline of geomythology, scientists and scholars from a variety of disciplines have contributed to this volume. The geological hazards such as earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and cosmic impacts that have given rise to myths are considered, as are the sacred and cultural values associated with rocks, fossils, geological formations, and landscapes. There are also discussions about the historical and literary perspectives of geomythology. Regional coverage includes Europe and the Mediterranean, Afghanistan, Cameroon, India, Australia, Japan, Pacific Islands, South America, and North America. But notice what I have here highlighted in red at the bottom. Myth and Geology, the book that we're talking about, challenges the widespread notion that myths are fictitious or otherwise lacking in value for the physical sciences. And so this is directly aimed at the pseudo killers, Brother Unk and his team, not understanding why it's important to understand foreign languages and the relationship of myth to describe natural phenomena as a way of articulating science, as at least understood up to that time for the general masses. There's a whole discipline on geomythology, peer-reviewed literature, PhD dissertations written on the subject. And so this is why we can't take serious, folks who don't like to study this stuff, but have something to say about, for example, African mythologies and the like. So we're going to get in this. So the one of the texts in there is what's the next slide? Yeah. So is the Bible and Geology, Destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so this is just the abstract of the text. The biblical story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is interpreted as a reflection of a real natural disaster. According to the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah were situated near the southern part of the Dead Sea Basin or in the Jordan River Valley. The description of their destruction in the Bible can be interpreted only as volcanic eruption. Evidence of Middle Holocene volcanism is absent both in the Dead Sea and Jordan River regions, but has been found in the Neogen Quaternary lava highland in the southern Syria. At two settlements, Kerbet el Umbashi and Habariye, dated around the second part of the third millennium BC, many animal bones were covered by basaltic lava. It is possible that the Bible's story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah combined collective memories about two events. Located in the Dead Sea region, Sodom and Gomorrah were most probably destroyed by a strong earthquake or flood, but the fresh memory about the two settlements perishing from a volcanic eruption caused the population to merge these two events. This is a very important thing to understand in terms of the volcanic eruption, because remember, Sodom and Gomorrah, they tried to use a volcanic eruption to explain the destruction of the cities, but of course, in true biblical fashion, and I can't even really just say in true biblical fashion. This is just ancient people in general. Every single time that there is a kind of a mass death or mass destruction, the assumption by ancient minds is that the people offended God in some way, and or the gods, and that the gods and or God is punishing them for their bad behavior. So because Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, because of uh, a volcanic eruption and earthquakes and tsunamis and things, well, they must have did something wrong very bad, and the Bible tries to explain it away because of homosexuality. So this is the story of Lot and things of that nature. But it is a volcano because of the punishment of hell and brimstone, or fire and brimstone. What is brimstone? Brimstone are firestones that are ejected from a volcano. And so we see Yahweh personified here as the volcano destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And so, in matter of fact, you find sulfur. So you also see brimstone associated with sulfur. And especially at the brim, that's where you get brim from, at the brim of the volcanic head, or the circle, you'll see especially there as a result of the volcanic eruption. And so, two other books that I recommend. So I'm giving y'all source material. So y'all got a lot of reading to do. So on the left hand side, remember, this is all part of my research for Ogun, and we're dealing with fire philosophy and the meaning of Kemet. But anyway, The Physics of Explosive Volcanic Eruptions, which is edited by J.S. Gilbert and R.S.J. Sparks from the Geological Society special publication. So if you want to, get into the science of volcanic eruptions, that's the book you get. And then on the right, Solomon Krunenberg, Why Hell Stinks of Sulfur, Mythology and Geology of the Underworld. Volcanoes are going to be very, very important in studying ancient mythologies, especially in Nigeria, Cameroon, and along the East African Rift. And then there's the rifts like around the Arabian Plate in the Middle East and the Levant. You'll find all of this, and as well as Greece. And so again, here's some source material. So it's again the Yahweh associated with light, associated with fire, and violent storms. It's not just violent storms like just like a thunderstorm. These storms derive from the actual volcanic explosion. Yahweh is a volcano. And what you see, like, this is a photo of an actual eruption. You notice that the chemical composition of the explosion of the volcano also caused lightning. And so this is where you get these thunderbolts. Why, for example, Zeus, who is also a personification, remember Zeus, Jupiter, all of them connected. And Zeus is, throwing lightning bolts from the top of a mountain because he is a volcano. And people look at it, have in the past have seen violent volcanoes explode and seen the storms that arise as a result of the explosion. And so this explains in terms of the Exodus story. For example, in Exodus 13 and 21, the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud, and by night in a pillar of fire. So they were guided towards, their destination in Canaan, because in the daytime you see this dark cloud, this black cloud. It's not any white cloud. It had to be unique. So we would see this black cloud by day, but at night you would see a pillar of fire. They're talking about an erupted volcano here, right? And so we have other, evidence, biblical evidence in terms of this relation of a volcano. So in Exodus 19 and 16, in Sinai, when morning came on the third day, there was thunder and flames and a thick cloud on the mountain and a horn sounding very loud. Exodus 19 and 18, and all the mountain of Sinai was smoking, for the Lord had come down on it in fire, and the smoke of it went up like the smoke of a great burning, and all the mountain was shaking. They're describing a volcanic eruption. And all the people were watching the thunder and the flames and the sound of the horn and the mountain smoking. What mountains smoke? Where do you see fire on top of a mountain? Erupted volcanoes. Yahweh is a volcano. And so when we understand the association from the root dealing with fire, and then destruction and demolition and ruins, and then the simultaneously of storms, because an erupted volcano looks like a storm coming, like a regular just rainy day storm coming. And you also hear thunder, because you remember thunder follows lightning strikes. So I hope all of this is coming together for you all. And so we understand the violent storm aspect of Yahweh, aka Seth of ancient Egypt, Ihu, Yahi, Yahweh, the coal, the coal of Yahweh is heard upon the flooded waters. El of Kabud causes thunder. And so that word coal is a word for voice. So we were saying the voice of Yahweh is heard upon the flooded waters. And so the coal, the voice of Yahweh is in power. The coal, the voice of Yahweh is in the majestic splendor, the light. And so you see this associated with light, and then we juxtapose this with the other verses dealing with Yahweh as the sun, right? So the coal, the voice of Yahweh breaks the cedars. Yahweh causes the cedars of Lebanon to be broken. The voice of Yahweh makes lightning flash. These are all attributes of a violent storm and or a violent volcano. They're being these conceptions are being combined here, in relation to Yahweh. And so in Job 36 and 30, 37 and 5, listen to the boom of his voice. A rumbling goes out of his mouth. He lets it roll under the whole sky, and his light, that's what this word means here, reaches the ends of the earth. After it booms, his voice and thunders his majestic voice. Kol, that's what the word kol means. Right? So in Kings 18:24, here Eliyahu tells the prophets of Baal, you will then invoke your God by name, and I will invoke Yahweh by name. Let us agree the God who responds with fire is the God. So they're trying to show off, not knowing that Yahweh has the attributes of Baal. They're the same God. But he's letting you know here, the one who responds with fire, like a volcanic eruption of lava, or through lightning in terms of a violent storm. They're both violent storm gods. Exodus 24:17. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. Exodus 13:21. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud. We read that already. And then, of course, in Exodus 19:24, the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. All these clues of geomythology in the Bible. You know, we can really argue that the Hebrews are pagans. They try to use this word with other religions, but they are the most paganist religion out there in existence. And so again, here's Yahweh in his natural form, right? And so, you know, in the other argument, in that article that we mentioned earlier, Seth as Baal, evidence from the Egyptian script, when Green describes the theophany of Baal, the divine name, or the theonym, he enumerates heavy rains, snow, and clouds. Stadelman adds that his voice can be heard in the yell of the thunder. Those elements of Baal's theophany find their clear expression in the Sethian vocabulary in Simnu rainstorm, Serek snow, Kiri storm clouds, Nishini storm rage, and the subcategory of uproaredness. Y'all really need this. Is a good article to read. If y'all want it, hit me up. I'll send it to you, so you don't have to guess about nothing. I got you. You know, on this source material, because he actually shows the hieroglyphs of these terms and associated with it, right? So the idea of the voice and the rumbling and all of that is going to become very important, because in ancient Egyptian, you have the word here, Nehem, thunder of the sky, shout, cheer. Also, Nehem, to quake. Nehem, roar, thunder. Him, warlike roar. And I stated, and this is coming from Aluja Volume 1, if we posit a borrowing into Hebrew from Egyptian, one could possibly argue Nechem, Yechem, Yahu with parasitic H added to the consonant final position. We could also get the H by way of Nehemhim, Nehuhu, Yahweh with loss of final MW, partial reduplication. So this is what I argue ultimately how we get the last H in Yahweh. It's really Yahim or Yehu, right? And so we have the vowel fricative is often considered a semi-vowel, right? And so here's an example of a correlation where the N is really nya. So in Coptic, we have nui, draw near, and then in collagen language, we have nyo, come here, right? And so this is how we write this in IPA, all right? So I have to show here that, you know, because the ancient Egyptian language has allegedly 4 types of H's, right, or fricatives. And so we write them, at least 2 of them with the H with a dot under it, and then the H with an underline, And then there's another H that we saw earlier with the curve under the H, and then just a plain H. But what I show here, and this is just part of a table that you can find in Alluja Volume 2, that the dotted H also corresponds with the regular H in the Egyptian language. And so you can see, you can pause this, and I show how this corresponds to forms in the Yoruba language. And we're gonna revisit this table either tomorrow or on Friday, because the Yoruba language, we're gonna find Yahweh amongst the Yoruba. And so y'all gonna be, some of y'all gonna be upset. Like, we ain't got nothing to do with Yahweh. Yes, you do. Yahweh's in Yoruba. And y'all gonna find out in what way the Yahweh's in the Yoruba language, right? So, more internal correspondences, for example, that where him demolish buildings, harm someone, debar from, exclude, attach. Him smack, smash, break, shatter, crush. Him wild of animals, hemet, an animal, hemet, a fish, hemet, cow, him, warm, dry, hot, which becomes him, to burn, to be hot, right? And so we see that same him that we saw earlier that gave all those derived forms, manifests itself in these forms that we saw earlier. So him, to burn, to be hot. What him, to burn, him burning. Him, hetch, saliva, similar. I only show this to show the partial reduplication that we're suggesting for Yahweh. And so we see the same thing here. Him, roar. Him, to roar, to rumble. Him, the crown. Him, at roar, war cry. Him, t, roar. Him, t, serpent, identified with Apophis, which is the violent storm snake that we saw, or that was mentioned earlier. So this him, remember that the M sound also interchanges with W, both in Egyptian and in Semitic. So when we have this form here, huet, to lament, which means to mourn or to cry. And so that correlates as a different variation of to roar, or to war cries, just a dialectical and slight semantic shift. To lament. And then huet, flame, fire. Huet, lamentations. Huet, to burn. Huet, wit, burning. And then hui, an evil animal, a demon. That's why it's associated with Apophis. So when you say hewi, this is again, we have huit with the dot under it, which gives us the word for Jehuti. But that same dot or whatnot, these are all related dialectical forms of, set. So ihi, or he, or ihu, or hu, or huit, meaning evil and everything. And so these different variations, become these, and of course, flood, into blow, violent, impact, or whatnot. All these are just different variations. The name of Set and Apophis. So, again, we go back to Hui, an evil animal, a demon, which is connected to him or him t, a serpent identified with Apophis. All these are just different dialectical variations over time in the ancient Egyptian language. And so, when we talk about, what I argue is that Yahweh, when we talk about Yahweh, you have a variation of Yahweh in Indo-European as Zeus. And then, of course, Yahweh here is just a variation of Zeus, which is a volcanic deity who strikes lightning from atop of a mountain, right? And so when you see, for example, in mythology, a cyclops is a personification of a violent volcano, which is why it has one eye. And so when you for example, when you see Cyclops on X-Men, he has a fiery one eye. So what is the words that I told y'all to remember? I told y'all to remember light, violent storm, volcano, destruction, demolition, all of that, right? And fiery eyes, right? Now, so when you see the volcano and the one-eyed cyclop with the red beams coming out of his eyes, like you see in X-Men, Cyclops in X-Men is the personification of a volcano, right? And violent storms at that. And so another good book to get, if y'all haven't gotten it, is Julian Baldick's Black God, the Afro-Asiatic Roots of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Religions. And no, it's not Black God in the same way that the Nation of Islam tries to argue for a Black God. No, not that. What Baldick is arguing is that there's a common, of course, we dispense with the whole Afro-Asiatic nonsense, but for the sake of conversation, Afro-Asiatic, this is just a summary of the text here. It says, it is argued that just as there is a common Afro-Asiatic language family, so too is there a common Afro-Asiatic family of religions. There is an inner logic to be found in myths, folktales, rituals, customs, and beliefs as far apart as Yemen and Nigeria, which go back to ancient past, shared by the Bible and the pharaohs. And so what's important for this is that what he discusses in Black God is that there's this common representation of Black gods among so-called Afro-Asiatic speakers. And the Afro-Asiatic speakers, when they're talking about a Black god, they're associated with storms, violent storms and rain. So some of them just have a violent nature to them, and some of them have a fertility nature to them. But everywhere it goes, it represents some kind of storm deity. So when you're seeing these Black gods in ancient Egypt, they have nothing to do with race and skin color, no matter what anybody tries to say. They all have to do with fertility and access to water and prosperity in that sense in ancient Egypt, because it has to deal with the flood, in relationship to the flood. However, in the other religions, it has to deal with violent storms, the other related religions. So that's why you had association with the black bull, or an ibex, for example. He gives, great commentary. And so, for example, on page 43, he talks about the legend of Al-Shamsi. And Shamsi is the word for sun in Semitic, which is known as Shemesh. And we'll get into that in the next conversation. So the legend of Al-Shamsi is told by the keeper of his tomb as follows. He came from Ethiopia and had only one eye in the middle of his forehead. A demon lived in the mountains which overlooked the area and every year demanded a virgin as a bride. In other words, Al-Shamsi, the word for sun, which derives from a root meaning fire, hot, is a dialectical variant of that same word him that we saw earlier, is here a volcano. Remember the volcanoes. These are volcanoes. The one-eyed cyclops. So you find this in even the stories of Ethiopia. He came from Ethiopia and had only one eye in the middle of his forehead. Here, Cyclops. And a demon lived in the mountains which overlooked the area and every year demanded a virgin as a bride. Like we gotta get serious in our studies here. But this is going to be very important. I think this is my last slide. Because in the Bible, remember that there's Yahweh, which we argue is a kind of a mix of just a normal rainstorm god and a volcano god, just like Baal and Seth is both of these. And then you have, who we used to pronounce as Yahweh Shai, and so the Yah part of Yahweh Shai is Yahweh. Allegedly God saves, Yahweh saves, right? And so you find these different descriptions, especially in Revelations, where Jesus is described in the vision as having skin as it had been, that is black as it has been burnt in a furnace. So you have in this same tradition the black storm god, Yahweh, whose hair was white like snow. It doesn't say white like wool. Anybody who reads wool can't read. There's no mention of the hair feeling like wool. The hair was white like wool and snow. There's a reason why they mentioned snow. It was white like snow and wool. The hair did not feel like wool. He did not have nappy hair. He was not a Negro. But they also mentioned that his eyes were flaming red. And how we used to argue it back in the day, and they still try to argue it now in the ICBK, is that his eyes were red because he drunk wine, right? And it's not because he drunk wine. It's because he is a storm deity. And part of the storm deity and volcano deity is that they have red eyes, as we saw earlier. I'm going to have to go back a lot of slides to show that. Where did we read this? Where did we read this? Who did we read this from? So here we go. So I'm showing you here Yahweh in the form of Tho, or Jehuti, the Yachim, and how this word becomes a Hebrew word. The Egyptian variant Yachim sounds close to the Hebrew name Yachim, that is alleged to mean raised up. But one source argues that it is Arabic and means to light and to stir up a fire, to stare with sharp eyes, a pit with blazing fire. The word Ajham is to mean someone with red eyes. This is a variation of Yahweh. Remember, or Yahweh. Remember that M and W interchange in Egyptian and in Semitic. And what I argue, it derives from the same root as an Egyptian him, be burning, be hot, to burn, without the J prefix here. So when you're looking at Jesus, Hawashai, Yeshua, if you want to say that, he's just another variation of God, Yahweh, who's a violent storm, who is a volcano with the red eyes. And so, this is some Hebrew Israelite drawing where they think Jesus was. No, this is not Jesus. But you have some elements right. But him being a Negro that's not it. But the skin of burnt brass, because it's the common black storm god tradition in the so-called Afro-Asiatic religions. And so this is God. This is Yahweh. He's Zeus. He is the Hebrew Zeus and the Hebrew Seth, who is also called Yahweh. And so this is where the confusion for like the moon comes in, because Seth, the same root that gives us Yahweh or Yahi in for Seth also gives us the same word for Jehuti, which is the moon god, and the word for moon itself, because it has to derive from fire and a derivative light. So all of this is the personification of fire in ancient mythology. So say hellos to Zeus and the volcano, and respect volcanoes when you see them. That is the end of my presentation. This is part 1 of a series. So we will be back on either tomorrow, if I finish the presentation tonight, or on Friday. And so Fridays will be a lot shorter. I'll try to keep it within an hour, and then we can spend the last hour maybe with some question and answers. So I'll give y'all time to kind of digest this and formulate your questions. And so make sure that before y'all go, that y'all that's right, hit the like button. Make sure that you share the content, and if you are new to this channel and like what we do here, please hit the subscribe and hit the bell so that you will get all of the notifications of when we have presentations or discussions like this and more. And so I do appreciate each and every one of y'all for joining us today. And until next time, peace.